Hello everyone, it's Monday the 27th of July and this is episode 81 of the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, your host Ben Eagle. It's good to be back with the show after a week away last week. There's been a bit of rain here in Essex these past few days and the combines aren't turning here at the moment, but I know in other parts of the country they have been, with Harvest 2020 in full flow. As farmers are pretty busy at the moment, we've got a non-farmer on the show today, but a voice you will recognise if you're a regular Countryfile viewer. Yes, Sean Fletcher is on the podcast. Before we head across to that interview though, let's take a look at some farming news stories from the past week. In the news this week, the Farmer Favourability Survey has shown record high support for British farmers. The poll, conducted by OnePoll, which has been run since 2012, showed 75% of Britons have a positive view of British agriculture. That's 6% up on last year. The major reason for this is cited as the pandemic and the role of farmers in the food supply chain over the past 4 months or so. The winter wheat harvest has kicked off much earlier than usual for some due to the strange weather we've had this year. Despite the conditions, many growers seem pleased with initial yields, with some even breaking personal yield records. A new National Lottery Heritage Fund project for £8.5 million has been announced for the Upper Teesdale in the North Pennines, County Durham, and Upper Swaledale in the Yorkshire Dales National Park. The aim is to help reverse the decline in biodiversity by hay meadow restoration, peatland re-establishment, river enhancement and wetland and woodland creation. So far, around 60 farmers and landowners have been involved, but it's hoped that all 300 farmers and landowners will ultimately get involved in the project. The Scottish Government has launched a £1 million grant scheme to encourage farmers to diversify into forestry production through the £40 million Agriculture Transformation Programme. The grants can be up to 90% of establishment costs. And that is the news for now. In the news! It's now time for today's main feature interview. I recently spoke to broadcaster and journalist Sean Fletcher, who you'll most likely recognise as a presenter on BBC Countryfile. Meet the farmers' friends! This evening I am speaking to broadcaster, journalist and BBC Countryfile presenter Sean Fletcher. Sean has been broadcasting for the BBC, ITV and Sky for more than 15 years. His journalism includes the Panorama investigation Kids in Crisis, which asked whether child and adolescent mental health services are fit for purpose after experiencing a long wait for care for his own son, who has OCD. As well as being a presenter on Countryfile, he also regularly presents on Inside Out and Good Morning Britain, and also co-presents Songs of Praise. He's got quite a wide CV. Sean, thank you so much for coming on the show. I said before we started recording, it's really nice to be speaking to you in a non-Countryfile capacity. Although I do have very fond memories of that very cold day back in January when we first met.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Ben, and thanks for inviting me on the podcast. So I remember, that first time we met was it January, and January filming for Countryfile is always cold. Obviously you've got farmers listening, so you all work outside, and those cold months are difficult for us. Softies in television. I do some programs inside, and I do Countryfile, and that's always outside.
And it was when the cars got stuck. I think that was that was a bit of a low point.
I'd forgotten about that, but yeah, it was the TV cars, remember, not the farming cars. You guys are fine.
So since then, life has transformed utterly. How has the lockdown been for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's been, and I think it was the same question I asked you on Countryfile, and I'll probably give a similar answer. I mean, it's up and down, isn't it? So I remember when it started. I mean, it was pretty scary for all of us, but in some ways, you were going into this new world that we didn't know what was going to happen. So for me, I'm freelance. I probably had my busiest month or 2 months of work in my whole career coming up. So March, the second half of March, all of April, and quite a lot of May was all booked up, and I don't normally get booked beyond that. So I had loads of work, and I suppose it's a bit like, and I don't say this flippantly, but it's a bit like if you're a farmer and you've got a big harvest and you know it's going to be a brilliant harvest, and then a storm comes and wipes it all out. And of course, that wipes the farmer out for the whole year. So it's not like that, because my work is starting to pick up. But it's that feeling of, this is a nightmare. This is a really difficult time. And, within 24 hours, all the companies and the broadcasters who had booked me called me up and said, look, we can't go ahead. We can't do this.
Wow.
And, you don't get anything for that. So I'm sitting around for a long time. But on the flip side, and I think a lot of people have found this, I think you said this when I talked to you on Countryfile, I was at home and I had time with my family, and it gives you time to sort of reassess things, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. In terms of, I'm the mental health campaigner. I just think it was very beneficial for lots of people to be able to sort of see what's under their nose and say, I'm going to spend some time with my son, and I'm going to go out for a walk with my wife, and things that I probably didn't have as much time to do before. So it forced us to do things that I think were really good as human beings. So that was good. And now the work's starting to pick up.
You were born in New York City. Your mother's Zimbabwean and your father is English. How long were you in the US for?
So I want to say 15 years, and I've got the accent. 2 years. But my parents got me a passport, American passport. So I have an American passport and a British passport.
Okay.
But you can tell from the accent, and I'm not very good at putting on accents. I didn't spend enough time there to sort of become naturalized and have an accent or anything like that. However, Jay-Z is about the same age as me, and I've worked out that he was in the same area as me in Brooklyn. Literally,
Really?
He's talked about, Jay-Z's often talked about Brooklyn, and so I have visions of me going to the same play group as Jay-Z. Maybe, who knows?
And you grew up not that far away from me, actually, on a small holding in Chelmsford in Essex. Your mum bred pigs, and you had about 200 laying hens. You also kept cattle and sheep at times. Tell me about your memories of that time and the influence that had on you.
Yeah, a big influence. And as I'm sure we'll discuss later, the main reason I got work at Countryfile and still work there and enjoy working there. So my parents came back to Britain in 1976 and lived in various places in Essex, so Braintree, Witham and Chelmsford. And then my dad, from there, my dad commuted to the city and worked as a computer programmer in London. And I think they just wanted to, they realised that because they were living in smallish towns or outside of towns in villages, and they just wanted to be able to be more in the country. And my mum was a nurse, and she gave up being a nurse, and we moved to a place that had some really run-down outbuildings, but not much land in terms of farms, but in terms of someone who'd lived in the town before, we had quite a bit of land, and some outbuildings and a pretty run-down house. And my dad carried on working in London, but my mum ran the farm, which was farm. It was a small holding. So we had 200 laying hens. So she would sell eggs by the roadside. I was quite young then, so we moved to the farm when I was 13. And as a teenager, you're not bothered about most things. But I remember certain, when we'd have one of our pigs slaughtered, then we'd fill the freezer with it. Our pork tasted good. And I remember learning at that time, actually, the stuff that I really feel is important now, that actually if you can have good quality stuff, maybe pay more for it, maybe have less of it. But it does taste different. And it does make sense, doesn't it? You are what you eat, and the stuff that your animals produce is obviously hugely affected by what they ate. So we had the hens. We had up to varying times, it varied between up to about 10 sows, probably mainly about 7 at most times, and then 1 lucky boar. I mean, I've learned since that boars on farms, they worked really hard, but this guy, he didn't have too many women to serve, and so we would have the litters from them, and we would keep one for the freezer every so often. It didn't make much money. I think it probably lost money, but the thing that my mum had was, and that farmers don't, the sort of thing that they can fall back on, is my dad was earning money so that it didn't have to make money. I think people who live in towns and cities, well, people who aren't involved in farming, don't realise how tight the margins are.
Yeah.
So I did a Countryfile soon after I did the one with you, and it was a lambing special. And I met a sheep farmer called Reese, a Welsh speaker. I've learned Welsh, so we got on really well.
Yeah,
he was actually a young man.
Later.
Yeah, he was a young man, and he'd taken over the family farm. And then he was telling me about, some years you just don't make money, and other years, once we found a dead lamb, and that really mattered. And I think for people like me, and I know most of your listeners will be farmers, but it's very important for people who don't farm, who live in cities, who go to the supermarket and buy the steak and don't think about where that, how that steak has got there and how long that has taken the farmer to grow. I think it's really important for us to remember that.
So you ultimately did a geography degree at KCL. So again, I'm interested in the influences. Obviously, yeah, your upbringing, I can see a lot of influence there. But why did you choose that path? And did you at that stage have any sort of inkling that you might be going down the journalism broadcasting route?
Not a clue at all. Actually, I didn't have a clue what I was going to do. It's interesting. My daughter's 22, my son is 17, and even at school when they're 15 now, even 13 now, they're saying, "Oh, you need to think what you're going to do and what university course you're going to." I didn't have a clue, and I think that puts a lot of pressure on kids nowadays. I just I wanted to be a music producer. I didn't really have a clue what I wanted to do. I ended up doing a 2-year course in music production after my degree. Okay. So geography, it was just a subject I was good at school. I think probably because I was interested in it. I mean, I look back now, and my mum died many years ago, but I remember getting a box of my old things from her house. And I remember this really well. I used to draw maps as a kid. So other kids were sort of drawing battle scenes or whatever, when you were really young and you could hardly draw. I'd draw maps, and I was just really interested in the layout of land, and that you'd have a rural area and then a town, and why the town was there and not there, and because of the river or because of the coast or whatever. So from an early age, I was really interested in that. I don't know if that's normal, but so that meant I was always really interested in geography, less so the physical side of geography, but more the human side. So why is something where it is? And so I ended up doing a geography degree, as you say, at King's College London. And what that was very much looking at all sorts of things like history, economics, sociology, and environmental issues, but spatially. So you look at history, but you actually look at why it happened there and why this happened next to it and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I mean, it's a subject that I love. A lot of people who do geography, people I know, they've gone on to be geography teachers, and being a broadcaster wasn't part of the plan. Doing geography probably wasn't really part of the plan. I feel very much like I've muddled my way to where I am.
Let's go straight onto that. The music production course. Was that straight after your geography degree, or did you have a bit of a break? And what were you thinking about that time?
Two things that big interest I had at school was sports. I played quite a bit of rugby, and I played the violin and sang and played piano. So I did music A level. And so that was sort of, what am I going to do? I ended up then being a sports journalist. So I did the other one, but I did a 2-year course in music production. And that's when my wife, she wasn't my wife at the time, but my wife had our daughter. So we had our daughter when we were both students. I'd done the degree, and it was after that. And so that suddenly meant that, you can't hang around a music studio making teas and just being cool. You actually need to earn a living. And at the time, the BBC and media was all sort of getting quite multi-skilled. So rather than have a technician to do one thing and a journalist to do the other, they'd get one person to do both. And obviously, having done the music course, I could edit on a computer. Computers and the internet were just sort of coming in. This is late 90s, early 2000s. So I was actually in quite a good position to do that. And that's, the rest is history. I think my sister-in-law was getting married, and one of her maids of honour worked at the BBC, and I ran in and gave her my CV and hounded her, and I got work experience at the BBC. This is in Wales.
Yeah. You started in Wales.
Yeah, so I had 2 weeks work experience, and anybody who's doing work experience, what it definitely means is you just need to work so hard and make yourself almost indispensable. So even if it's making teas, they think, oh, he's quite good at making teas, wasn't he? So I think that's probably the only reason I got the job, because I can make a good cup of tea. So that'd be a trainee researcher job. It's a very important skill, more important than most of media.
Probably is, actually.
So I then went to, I then got a trainee researcher role. And I look back and we're talking about profit margins. I mean, I had a child and a wife to support, and I was earning, I think it was less than £9,000 a year. And they were cheeky. I mean, we went majorly into debt, probably still paying back the debt now. Really, it was, I mean, I just borrowed and borrowed just to start that career. And, then I managed to get better jobs, although BBC didn't pay that well. So it took a long time to pay off those debts, but that was sort of like an investment, and it had to work. And I see, say, like my daughter and her generation, she's 22, and they sort of have that option to say, well, I'll try this and I'll try that. And actually, maybe that's not a good thing because people have so many options. We didn't have any options. I'd gone for the media thing, and it had to work.
You sort of went around the BBC News circuit from Five Alive to BBC Weekend News, BBC Breakfast, BBC World News.
So we were in Wales for 10 years. We lived there, but I then commute to London from 2006. So I worked at the news channel. Okay. In Wales, I was in sport and a bit in news. But then in London, I was at the news channel doing sport and then doing a bit of news. So it's sort of, just flitting around between news and sport, really. And then from 2010, we decided to move up to London. So I was in Wales for in the end 12 years. And during that time, I learnt Welsh. It was at our wedding, actually. And my wife is a Welsh speaker from Llanelli, and her father is a Welsh professor. So at our wedding day, I stood up and probably after a glass of wine and said, I promise I'm going to learn Welsh. And you wake up the next morning. Well, when you wake up the next morning after a drink and you think, did something just happen? Did I do something I shouldn't have done? Yeah, and I was committed, basically. I was useless at languages at school. And this is something I draw a lot of confidence from when I go into meetings in media, or I'm doing a program where I feel a little bit intimidated, or I'm not quite sure I can pull it off. I always think, well, I've learned Welsh, and I was useless at languages, and I was always in the bottom sets for French, and I didn't learn anything else at school in terms of languages. And but I learned Welsh by doing intensive courses. The BBC said they were language friendly or Welsh friendly in BBC Wales, so they would give members of staff classes once a week. Right. But I basically pushed them and told them, well, are you really Welsh language friendly or not? And I just basically forced them into giving me lessons every day of the week. So they basically paid for my lessons to go to an hour and a half every morning.
You started doing pieces for Countryfile in 2015, in October 2015. How did that come about?
So I was working at ITV actually at the time, Good Morning Britain, and which I still do from time to time. And a researcher from Countryfile got in touch with my agent and just said that we're doing this strand during the winter where we get a celebrity. I mean, I'm not a celebrity, but someone who in the public eye to talk about their favourite walk or their favourite spot in the countryside or beach or whatever. So they asked me if I wanted to do that, and I said, yeah, it's great. So I had a research chat with the researcher, and he found out that I'd been brought up on a farm and the stuff we've talked about, pigs and chickens, and my interest in that. And then so the boss of Countryfile got in touch and said, oh, do you want to come down for a chat? And so I went down to Bristol. I think it was just that I'd run the London Marathon. I've done 4 London Marathons, and I just run my first one. I couldn't. I mean, if you've ever run a marathon, you can't walk.
Well, you literally just run the marathon.
Yeah.
And then you
so
got
on the Sunday.
Call.
Well, no, I'd got the call before, but I'd set the meeting up in Bristol on the Monday after the London Marathon. So I'm literally hobbling along, and I got the train down. Have you been to Bristol Parkway Station? There are so many steps, and the worst thing when you just run a marathon. You can't go up, and you can't go down, I think. So what you have to do is turn and walk down the stairs backwards. So I'm going on Bristol Parkway, walking backwards down the stairs, and hobbling my way to the BBC in Bristol. And I had a chat with them, talked to them about my background and my interests, and they were really interested in maybe getting me to front a piece. And so very soon after that, I pitched an idea to them. And it's a Welsh idea. And it's something, if you're in the Welsh language scene, you will know about. But most people in Britain don't know about it. And it's a story that actually was repeated up and down the country in England as well. It was 50 years, it was the 50th anniversary of the flooding or we call it drowning in Welsh. Boddi is the word. So the drowning of a village to make a reservoir for an English city. So in Wales, in the Welsh-speaking scene, it's very much a sort of Wales and the Welsh language versus England at a time when there were real problems between the two. There were issues with the Welsh language being phased out, and this very Welsh-speaking village, that basically people were told, you've got to move, and we're going to give you pittance for your land, and because Liverpool needs a reservoir.
Wow.
And this happened in the north of England as well, where you've got great valleys where you can make it to a reservoir. So they drowned this village. So it was a Welsh versus England story. But actually for Countryfile, it's a rural versus urban story.
Yeah.
A city needs water, get rid of the rural population. And however small that village is, that is wrong. That city, that village had been there, and there was a school, there was a post office, there was a community, and they were drowned. And the worst thing was, and I felt really passionate about this from a Welsh point of view, because I feel adopted Welsh after learning Welsh, but also from a rural point of view, they had so much disregard for their lives. The payments they got for their land was shocking. So these were farmers, these were people who lived on the land. There was a community that served itself, and they were basically forced off. And some of the farmers were driven to the higher ground, which wasn't very good to farm. Others had to move elsewhere, but the compulsory purchase order, the money that they got was absolute pittance. And I mean, nowadays I don't think that would happen. So this was a real symbolic story for the Welsh language and for the rural community. And so that was the thing I pitched to Countryfile, and they liked it. And so I made the piece, I made the story, and then from then on, it works both ways. You pitch stories to Countryfile, and they also come with you. I come to you with stories, and so from then on, I've done other stories that they've given and some that I've given as well.
Fantastic. You travel a lot. Do you have and obviously you have a particular affinity to Wales, but if you had to pick one place, what's your favourite part of the UK?
It sort of stayed the same for a long time. It's Gower, the Gower Peninsula in South Wales, and that's near where my wife is from. So some of our early dates were down on Worm's Head and Three Cliffs. I don't know if you know that area, but I remember when I first went there, when I first met my wife, and I remember going to Tor Bay, which is one of the beaches. It's my favourite beach in the world, and I remember looking at and it was a sunny day, and I remember thinking, I've been to loads of beaches around the world, and I've seen loads of pictures of beaches around the world. There is no better beach than this. Some of the beaches that we have in Britain are the best, but you just can't guarantee the weather. But that day, it was sunny, and it was it's like a 10-minute walk to get there, so you didn't have loads of people around you. We were sharing the beach with like 4 or 5 people. Massive beach. And that place, Gower Peninsula, is particularly special. I've recently done an ITV programme called Wonders of the Coast Path, where I walk the Wales Coast Path, and we stopped off in Gower, and I remember thinking, it is really special, and it has a real personal connection with me.
Yeah, tell me a bit about that series, actually, because by the time this comes out, it will have just come out last week. But tell me about making that series, the trip itself, and perhaps how it impacted on you and your way of thinking at the moment.
Yeah, so it's called Wonders of the Coast Path, and it's 870 miles, I think, the Wales Coast Path. I've heard 2 different things, but I think it's the first country with a path all the way around its coast.
Right.
I've heard recently that it's the only country, but I'm sure there must be countries since that have had a coast path. But yeah, it's the first, definitely the first. So you can walk all the way around. It takes you obviously a very long time, but we, in Master of Television, we sort of picked nations. Probably shouldn't be saying that, should I? But yeah, I mean, I ended up doing the illusion. Yeah, no, I walked every inch of it, but so we took in loads of things. So obviously there's great scenery, there's amazing history. We met up with a sheep farmer on Anglesey. I mean, there were loads of things. We were on Gower. I was fishing. I was doing an old form of fishing in the River Severn, which is quite dangerous, but on low tide. Okay. It's called lave net fishing. So you sort of go out and hold a net and hope that a salmon jumps into it. They don't have anything, but it's sort of keeping up the tradition. And although you have to have a license for it, so I didn't have a license, so I was sort of standing by them. Okay. But what that did, it made me realise that that scene would have been happening in towns and villages all the way up the Severn, so all the big rivers. People would have been fishing where their town is, and these guys are sort of continuing this tradition. So we did that. I did some horse riding on Merthyr Mawr, which is one of the biggest sand dunes in Europe. But yeah, it's basically a walk around the Welsh coast path, picking up some great stories, meeting people who are passionate about their area and what they do, and they want to tell you about it. It's almost like doing 3 or 4 Countryfile pieces in one program and put together and following that path. And that's sort of basically what it is. And that's basically my only trick. I basically do meeting people, hearing about their stories, and just really enjoying it. And I think as a journalist, it's great because you can't not be interested when someone is passionate about a story and has something to show you. So in a way, I feel like the luckiest man alive because I'm hearing these great stories. And also the other thing with filming is you get amazing access to these things. So if I just rocked up at your farm, and I said, oh, can I see what you do? You sort of say, that's a bit weird, can you go away? But because we've come with a crew, you're allowing me into your life. So I know quite a bit about you now, and it's no, but it's great. It's wonderful. I love hearing about people's lives.
Yeah, same. That's why I do this show. Adam Henson recently presented a feature on Countryfile a couple of weekends ago, which touched on suicide specifically within the farming industry. Why now? Why is now a good time to be talking about the subject?
Well, I mean, we should have been talking about it years ago. We should always be talking about it. And this is one thing as a mental health campaigner, I feel really strongly about, that mental health is the poor relation compared to physical health. And the fact is we haven't been talking about it, and too many people have lost their lives. Every single suicide, and this isn't the case with other things, like if someone has cancer and dies, it is tragic, but it might not be preventable. But every single suicide is preventable, and that means everyone is just particularly tragic, because had something happened, was someone able to talk to them, had something happened in a different way, that suicide could have been prevented, and makes me feel really sad talking about it now. Every single one is preventable if we could have certain things in place. Now, of course, we talked about this on Countryfile, didn't we? That it's like a perfect storm on a farm, because it's men, and men we know are more susceptible to suicide in terms of the figures. So, it still shocks me when you see those figures of suicide is the biggest killer of men under 45, or is it 50 now? It's sort of around, it's 40, 45.
45,
And I've heard that figure so many times, but that's just unacceptable. The biggest killer of men under 45 is something that really should be preventable. That that if you could talk to people, if you can catch people at a certain moment, you can prevent it. And one of the things you mentioned that I did a panorama on the access or the funding of CAMS, which is Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services, because of the experiences I had with my son. But right across the board, mental health care, the provision is just not good enough. The awareness is not good enough. And now we're raising awareness, but there's no point raising awareness if there isn't a provision for it. So if someone is ill and someone is happy has got to the stage and they're brave enough to say, I don't feel good, I have had suicidal thoughts. We as a nation, and we are a wealthy nation in the grand scheme of things, we as a nation need to be there to be able to say, we can pick up the pieces straight away. And I don't believe that happens quick enough and it's available enough in this country, which I just think is a disgrace. And definitely with the area that I was looking to was with children. The area with children they're the poor relations. There's more money spent on adults than there is on children. So I just think it's shocking.
Without wanting to push at all, are you okay to tell us the story of your son's struggle with mental health? This is specifically OCD.
Yeah, so he's got obsessive compulsive disorder. He's 17 now, but at the age of about 12, he was always quite an anxious child, and when he got to about 12, things started to get really bad. So he was unable to leave the house. Just didn't want to. He feared, he was too anxious. He didn't want to get out of bed then, and then then he wasn't feeding himself, and he wasn't brushing his teeth, and just doing really basic things. And that's because he had quite bad thoughts. So they would be violent or sexual thoughts, and they would be, we might have those thoughts, but if you don't have an obsessive compulsive disorder, you would just think, oh, that's just a thought. That's just
yeah.
But if you have obsessive compulsive disorder, that thought will go around in your head. So my son missed a year of school. He was in hospital for 6 months. It was a really difficult period, and it nearly tore our family apart. However, then eventually we got the right level of care at the Maudsley Hospital, which is the National OCD Centre in South London. And it actually is very treatable for many people if you have CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, and certain levels of medication. And he is in a much better place now. He'll always have OCD, but he is in a place where he can go to school. He's doing his A-levels, so he will do the actual exams next year. He's out playing football at the moment with some friends, and he's great. So it's a real example of, if you can get treatment, just like the farmer who is feeling suicidal, if you can get help, if you can get treatment, it's actually, on most of your mental illness, is treatable. We need to be spending more on mental health treatment, so that people have the tools to be able to deal with it themselves.
Mm-hmm. With every mental health story as well, it's not just the individual who's involved; it's the people who are connected with them as well. Did you and your wife? Did you feel supported sufficiently? Did you have sufficient support networks during that period?
So the thing with mental health is it can be really embarrassing. So our son was unable to do stuff, and he was doing some quite embarrassing things. So we initially, I think we didn't really want to talk about it. You don't talk about these things. Had he had a broken leg, we'd have been telling all people on the street, oh well, he's broken his leg because he was playing rugby. Whereas now, actually we don't really want him to make a noise or whatever, do something that would be embarrassing on the street. Obviously that eventually wears off because you can't do that forever, but there's a real stigma with mental illness. So, I keep bringing it back to the farmer who has had suicidal thoughts. The last thing, and particularly as a man, last thing you want to be doing is telling your neighbour. People just don't, and we need to probably change that so that it's exactly the same as him saying, I broke my arm while I was, on the tractor. Actually, I've got suicidal thoughts, and that they mean the same thing, or they have the same sort of sentiment. But actually, you'd say about your broken arm, but you wouldn't say about your suicidal thoughts. And it's the same with Ruben. We didn't, but there was we talked to close family members, and people don't really understand because they've not been in that situation. So many people don't help, but they want to help, but they don't help. And I think a lot of parents feel that you either don't want to talk about it, or if you do, people just say the wrong things. And I don't blame them, but it's sort of, that's just the situation you're in. And then what happened once was I was running my third London Marathon, and I was doing it for a mental health charity called Heads Together, which is the Royal Foundation, Prince William and Kate, and Harry before Meghan, had a mental health charity, and it was the Heads Together London Marathon, so it was a big mental health push. And I was at an event to launch it. I was running for them, but I didn't realise they were coming. I was just sitting in the front row, alongside Rio Ferdinand. And I thought, this seems a bit bigger than I thought it would be. And the world's press with it. I'm just a bit stupid like this. I just thought there's a lot of press here, but it was like CNN and all this sort of stuff. And of course, in the media, they all get the tip off that the royals are coming. I didn't know. So I'm sitting there going, this is a bit bigger than I thought. And then William, Kate, and Harry walk in, and they're on the stage talking about this marathon. I thought, well, it's quite good to be in this team. And then afterwards, and if you ever meet the royals, what happens is you get put in groups. So I didn't realise this. I was just sort of standing there chatting to actually a friend, Sean Williams, who used to present on the BBC. I think he then was on Channel 5 for a bit. And I was chatting to her. And in media, it's not like farming where they're good, wholesome, friendly people. In media, people will be talking to you and they'll be looking over your shoulder at the next person to speak to. It's really rude. It's just that, and she was doing that to me. And I was thinking, can you just look at me in the eye? You're talking to me. And I turned around and Prince William was there behind me. He's been crying, so someone whispers in the ear, that's Sean Fletcher, his son's got OCD. So he came up to me and he said, actually nobody knew my son had OCD. He just came up to me and said, oh, why are you running the London Marathon? And I hadn't really prepared for it. So I just said, well, my son's got OCD. And it's literally the first time I told anyone outside our close family.
And
so,
it was Prince William.
Future King of England, yeah. And I mean, have you ever met him? He's just a really nice guy. So we had this quite, 5-minute chat.
Yeah.
Actually, quite a lot for roles, but brief chat. And it was just like two dads talking together. And he just had George, I think, and we were chatting, and he was just asking, how Ruben is, and he's just a really nice person, and we made it very personal, and we shared some stories about being a dad, and he sort of showed some concern about his kids or child at the time, always, what should I be looking out for? But what it felt like afterwards, he left there and then went on to the next group. And I was really worried. I thought, my gosh, I've just said this secret that we've been living for 6 months a year. That I've just basically blurted it out. My wife and I don't tell anyone. And then I've told him, and the press is sort of listening in and everything. It just, I don't know, I felt so vulnerable and exposed.
Okay.
But then I also felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders.
Yeah.
And actually it made me realise, who cares? Of course I care for my son, but who cares that I've told the world that my son's got OCD? It's exactly the same as if I told them that he's got a broken leg. Well, it should be. It doesn't feel that way, but it should be. And when you do, it's like a problem shared is a problem halved. So I just we realised that we felt so much better. And then people knew how to talk about it. I don't know, it just didn't feel like this dirty secret. It just felt like we could talk about it. And that for me is the best example of how, when people go, oh, you need to talk about it. It's so true. Talk about it. If you've got an issue, there's no shame in it. If you're having suicidal thoughts, if you've got OCD, if you're worried about the way your mind is working, just talk about it. Open up. Maybe you need to see a professional, or maybe you just need to talk to your friend or your wife or your, person you see down the pub. Just open up, and it does make it feel so much better and easier to deal with.
Yeah. What do you have coming up over the coming months? Do you have? I know your diary has been quite empty, but is it filling up again?
Well, yeah, I'm doing a show called Sunday Morning Live. So it's on BBC One. It starts at 10:45. I think it's moving to 10:30 in the coming weeks. With Sally Phillips, the comedian, and she's just brilliant to work with.
Oh, amazing! I'm very jealous.
Genuinely, really funny. I mean, really, just like off camera, but on camera as well. It just makes you laugh. I mean, I go through the whole hour just laughing, which is good. Go to work and you laugh. So she's brilliant to work with. So I'm doing that every Sunday. Excellent. I'm also doing a new, so the Wales Coast Pass program I did called Wonders of the Coast Pass, which goes out on ITV. It's a 6-part series, so it's 8:30 on ITV. We're now going to be doing Wonders of the Border. So we're now going to be going up the border from. So we ended in the River Severn. We ended in River Wye. So we go up the River Severn up to the River Wye, and we're going to now go up the border up to the north of Wales, which is where we started the first one. So I'll have done the whole loop. I'll be filming that's from September. I'll be back on Good Morning Britain as well on ITV. So I've got a few things going on, but it as I said, it was my busiest ever sort of 2 months, and that was just wiped off the shelf. All of that went. So I'm sort of trying to pick things up slowly. But what I felt is it's been quite nice to try and keep busy doing things like this. I did a sourdough cooking challenge, a 20-day sourdough challenge on Instagram. Which is just doing a load of Instagram lives with a sourdough chef, and we linked up and we basically from scratch made the mother, sort of the pre-starter thing that is in my fridge. It's basically a fungus that you then make then you make the bread with.
Don't let it die.
I know, but you can put it in the fridge for a couple of weeks and you don't have to feed it. When it's out, you have to feed it twice a day. It's like having another child. So I've been doing things like that to keep busy, and work will pick up. And I'm privileged to be doing Wonders of the Border. Apparently they're going to put me in a paraglider or something for a couple of it, and I'm scared of heights. So maybe I'm not that privileged, but it's great.
Yeah. Well, Sean, thank you so much for coming on the show. Glad that work's picking up and that you're doing well as well.
Well, it's good to talk to you, Ben. Thanks very much.
Meet the farmer's friends.
Broadcaster and Countryfile presenter Sean Fletcher. That's all we have time for today, but thank you very much for listening, and thanks to my guest Sean and to the show supporters, the Mercer Family Charitable Foundation. Next week, I'll be speaking to mixed farmer Rich Heedy. Until then, though, have a great week, and I'll see you next time on Meet the Farmers.